What is going on, everybody? Hope everyone is doing well. My name is Jason. I'll be your host on this CFL talk show, Hussey's Huddle. In this video, we're going to break down all of the actions for all of the CFL teams so far this offseason, just kind of give a summary for each team, their re-signings, still players that are big pending free agents that are going to become free agents next Tuesday, and players that have already been linked to them from other teams now that the negotiation window is now open. But really quickly before we get started, if you want to support the channel, the best way to do it is by hitting the like button and subscribing to Hussey's Huddle for more CFL content just like this. I greatly appreciate it. And I also have a few announcements. First of all, shout out Team Canada men's soccer team beating the US on the weekend. I actually went to the game here in Hamilton. Great time, and just so proud to be Canadian that day. And then another announcement is about the live stream next Tuesday for free agency. The time that it does open at noon next Tuesday, February the 8th. I'll be live on the channel, the first live stream on the channel, and really looking forward to that. And with those things said, let's get on with the video. So before we get into the team overviews here, I'm just going to put timestamps in the description so you guys can just click forward to whatever team you want to see. You don't have to watch through the whole video if you don't want to. So keep an eye out for that in the description or in the comments section. And with that said, let's get on with these team overviews for so far in this offseason and priming us for free agency next Tuesday. So starting in the West Coast, and then we're going to work our way towards the East. We're going to start with the BC Lions, and I wanted to start with BC because I have a lot to say about their offseason direction so far and what they've been rumored to be doing. So obviously I can't talk about all of the signings that they've had. It would just go on all day, but I wanted to note a couple of notable re-signings for every team. Brian Burnham, wide receiver. I mean, I've spoken very highly of Brian Burnham on this channel. A few weeks ago, I did a top 15 wide receiver list. I had him at number 2. I still believe he's just such a high floor guy as a receiver, almost the highest floor of any receiver in the league, does so many things well. Really crucial for them to bring him back at a pretty cheap deal compared to what they gave Lucky Whitehead. And then they brought back their left tackle, Joel Figueroa. I think he's the best offensive lineman, and even though that's not saying much, they have a pretty bad offensive line. I'll talk about that more in a minute. It's important to bring back Figueroa, who had a little bit of a bounce back season at times this year, so a good veteran to have keep around here if you're the Lions. And then the final re-signing I wanted to highlight is the signing of a linebacker, Isaiah Messam, a pretty good Canadian player. He's played at multiple spots for that defense, and I think he could be a big part of their depth and versatility in the ratio aspect of the game going forward at that linebacking / DB position. So I'm really interested to see what he does going forward. And then what's more interesting with the Lions are some of the players that they've been linked to, and it's almost the team that we have the most information about that's already came out about who they're interested in going after from other teams. So you got to start with the big one, and this one really has me shaking my head. And it's not because this guy's not a great player, and that's wide receiver Kenny Lawler from the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, who led the CFL in receiving this past year, had a great season, not taking anything away from Kenny Lawler. Apparently, they're throwing $250,000 for next season, which would make him by far the highest paid receiver in the league and the highest paid non-quarterback in the league. And, you know, I'm not saying Kenny Lawler isn't worth that money. I think, he's up there in terms of, you want to argue, the best receiver currently in the CFL. But honestly, I think because of BC's situation, like, the wide receiver room is already their biggest strength on that roster, in my opinion, along with their defensive backs. And you already have 2 of the top, 5 wide receivers in the league in Lucky Whitehead and Brian Burnham. I don't know why you should allocate another huge salary, and you would be spending so much on those 3 receivers. And I think they just have so many other needs elsewhere. The offensive line, the defensive lines, they really just need to be beefed up and kind of overhauled again this offseason. They really struggled yet again in 2021. So I think that's really concerning from that perspective, and I was very concerned when I heard that they are throwing this kind of money at Kenny Lawler. I think they're just repeating past mistakes of being too much of a finesse team. This game is about blocking and tackling a lot at the end of the day, and BC is just not very good at both of those kind of things. So I'm just saying, if I was a BC Lions fan, I'd be kind of concerned with this kind of move. I really think they need to address other areas of this roster and kind of reassess where they're allocating a lot of these funds. They got a lot of money saved from the Mike Riley retirement. I think that's really what they're trying to do. They're going to not get into the market for a high-end quarterback, which is great, but I think and go with a much cheaper option in Nathan Rourke. But I think you need to give him a good offensive line to give him the best chance of success as a first-year starter in the Canadian Football League. Some other players here that they're rumored to be interested in: Luchez Purifoy from the Saskatchewan Roughriders, defensive back, can play a lot of different positions, arguably the most versatile defensive back in the league this past season. Sean White, place kicker from the Edmonton Elks, had such a consistent career, arguably the most consistent year-to-year kicker over the past 10 years or so, up there with Rene Paredes from Calgary. So it would be an interesting thing. I think he's from the West Coast. If he signs in BC, it'll be interesting coming back home. And then David Menard from the Montreal Alouettes, who played there previously. I think he's, due for a regression from what he saw in terms of production-wise this past season. I think he had like 10 sacks this year and was nominated for Most Outstanding Canadian, and I don't think he's ever going to repeat that, but I think he's a solid, rotational and capable of starting games at that defensive tackle spot and defensive end spots. So I think that's a decent get for the Lions if they can sign him come February 8th. But my concern with BC is that they don't land one of these like high-profile defensive ends or tackles, and they're stuck in the mud next year again because their line play is just not up to snub. Now that my lengthy rant on the BC Lions is over, we'll move on to the Edmonton Elks. And not a lot of big-name re-signings for Edmonton. They've decided to, I think, let a lot of these guys go out the door. Guys like Greg Ellingson, Darrell Walker, Tremaine Washington, Kwaku Boateng. These guys have been kind of not really linked to any really big contract negotiations with the team. And that there's been reports from guys like Dave Naylor and elsewhere that this team's looking at a big overhaul of this roster this offseason. But they have brought back some guys. James Wilder Jr., I think, was their most outstanding player last year at running back, and was really just a bell cow for this team. And he comes back, and I'm excited for that because Wilder really did. I think he was playing his best football we've seen from him at the CFL level in 2021. And then Canadian receiver Tavon Smith, kind of surprised that they brought him back because he had a down season and kind of was outshone by Shai Ross throughout this season. And Tavon Smith had a really good rookie season in 2019 where he was basically started every game as a true rookie in the CFL. And clearly the team, by bringing him back here, even after a disappointing season in 2021, still has confidence that he can become that, consistent all-around receiver. And they've also brought back Mike Jones, another Canadian receiver, too, who was pretty good for them last year. And then finally, I just wanted to mention it here, and this is not a re-signing or a guy that's played in the CFL at all, but that's a relatively big name, and that's Ohio State quarterback J.T. Barrett, or former Ohio State quarterback J.T. Barrett. And, excited to see what he can do. Very interesting quarterback room they're building in Edmonton. And I think that's a good transition into who they're rumored and connected to. So, starting with the quarterback position, Jeremiah Mazzoli from the Hamilton Tiger Cats being rumored to basically be a bidding war between the Edmonton Elks and the Ottawa Redblacks. Going to be really interesting to see what that choice is from Mazzoli. I do expect it to be Ottawa. I think it's just better for him to stay in the East. And, I think he will face less competition for the job than he will in Edmonton, who already has Nick Arbuckle, brings in a proven college player in JT Barrett, big name guy that's going to sell tickets potentially. And then you got other options there as well, Taylor Cornelius. Interested to see what that decision is for Mazzoli, but Edmonton is heavily interested. But that's really all I've seen in terms of big name guys that have been connected to Edmonton so far in this negotiation window. I'm recording this as of Tuesday. Now moving on to a team that's been very busy in terms of its key re-signings, the Calgary Stampeders. And man, I'm just going to read off the list of key guys they brought back. Left tackle Derek Dennis, who played for the team in 2019, was famously under contract with the Edmonton Elks for this past season and just didn't report to the team. Had a bunch of arguments with the team, but he's a great player. And, I think it's just the culture at Edmonton. It's understandable why a guy didn't want to go play there last year. So he comes back to Calgary, where he spent the majority of his career. Former most outstanding offensive lineman, big re-signing there for Calgary. Kamor Jordan, who I've talked about a lot in videos, really good wide receiver. Kicker Rene Paredes, just super consistent. Mike Rose, defensive tackle, I think the most impactful defensive tackle in the league right now. Guard Ryan Sevier, very underrated offensive lineman. Jameer Thurman at weak side linebacker, just a difference maker, one of the rare difference makers at linebacker in the CFL, in my opinion, in terms of coverage ability, just all-around ability from that linebacker spot. And then defensive tackle, Canadian defensive tackle, Derek Wigan, just a really versatile guy, and obviously for sure Canadian starter day one. And then finally, Kadeem Carey and Sean McEwen. Kadeem Carey, running back, apparently just got the biggest contract for in terms of annual value for a American running back since Ricky Williams in 2006 when he came to the CFL. So big shoes to fill in terms of that salary for Kadeem Carey, but he earned it with a great season last year, and I think he obviously, I think he still has more room to grow. That was really only his first season as a full-time starter, so really excited to see what he can do. And then McEwen, starting center, I think the All-Star appearance really speaks for himself right there, but just an incredible offensive lineman. Now, they have some key guys that I think are interesting that they haven't re-signed yet. Defensive end Sean Lemon, who was very good for them last year, just quietly produces every year. Just you look up every year, and he has like 8 or 9 sacks, and just that kind of consistency is going to be very sought after on the open market. But I thought Calgary was going to bring him back because he had a pretty good season last year after they kind of bought low on him. And then defensive back Royce Mechie, Canadian, capable of playing safety, just a very good player. I think he suffered a season-ending injury this year, unless I'm getting Mechie confused with someone else. And then Brandon Dozier, a guy that plays a lot of strong side linebacker for them this season, played that role very well and also led them in special teams tackles. I thought he's going to be a very sought-after player on the open market, and it's going to be interesting to see if Calgary ultimately retains him. And then Comrie Williams, their starting left tackle from last season. Obviously, they bring back Dennis, so it's less of a pressing need to bring back Williams, but he's a hell of a player that can play a lot of different roles, including center, and it's a rare guy that can play center and left tackle, so I think he's going to be really in high demand. He might price himself out of Calgary. Going to be interesting to see if Calgary really presses to retain him. And then finally, I just wrote down a little question here for Calgary going into free agency. Can they secure a proven pass rusher? I think that's really the weakness on this team if they don't bring back Lemon. They got some interesting pieces there, like a Demi Berglund, and Mike Rose obviously brings a lot of heat inside and the best interior pass rusher, but I think they're really missing that elite edge presence if they don't bring Lemon back, so keep an eye on that going into free agency for Calgary. Now moving on to the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and a lot of key re-signings here in recent weeks as well. Mike Edam, Canadian safety, just really solid, hard-hitting, kind of box safety kind of type. Can play pretty good coverage as well, but not a dynamic coverage player in that sense, but a really key guy for them, and he's been there for a while there in Saskatchewan. Has had a couple of his best years the past few seasons. And then wide receiver Shaq Evans really struggled this past season, but back in 2019 was a top 3 receiver in the CFL, in my opinion. Really good deep threat. So I think if they can get that bounce back, that would be huge for this receiving core. Kicker Brett Lawther, Canadian kicker here, and just really effective guy in a league that a lot of these teams really struggle in terms of their kicking situation. I'm looking at you, Hamilton Tiger Cats. But you have these teams that struggle. It's really important to know who your kicker is going to be from a really early standpoint and have that position settled. So really good for Saskatchewan to keep a great kicker here in Lawther. And then Kyron Moore, I think, is a really underrated receiver. Really good underneath guy that will create yards after the catch. Very, very fast. Good punt returner. And I think before his injury late last season, he was their best receiver in this offense. And then finally, running back Jamal Morrow. And I think this is really interesting going into this offseason as the Saskatchewan Roughriders, what you're going to do with your running back situation. You got William Powell, who's getting up there in age. I think he's like 33, 34, basically ancient for a pro football running back. And then you got this really athletic running back in Jamal Morrow, who hasn't seen a lot of opportunity on the offensive side, but has flashed amazing ability on special teams. And we've seen guys in the CFL make that transition from an elite special teams guy into a great offensive weapon. So it'll be interesting to see. Now they bring back Jamal Morrow. They've already re-signed him, but they have not re-signed William Powell. If they're going to move on from William Powell, we'll see him elsewhere in the CFL next season. Now that's a good transition into the players that they have yet to re-sign. William Powell, obviously, as we just mentioned. Luchez Purifoy, as I mentioned with the BC Lions, getting a lot of interest from that team. But I think Purifoy was such a key component of this defense last year, and how they were able to shoulder the load of so many injuries from even before the season and during the season as well. Guys like Mike Edem going down, and Purifoy really moving around to a lot of different spots. So I really think that's a guy that's going to be really crucial for them to keep. Duke Williams, who obviously came in as a really high, prized receiver in terms of a guy that's coming from the NFL and used to, be one of the best receivers in the CFL. And he started to, really get going towards the back half of the season, was really big into that playoff game against Winnipeg. So I think, he's a priority, and he's honestly probably their biggest pending free agent right now. And then defensive back, Ed Gainey, a very versatile, a really key veteran defensive back for this team, really big playmaker, and getting up there in age, played in the league for a long time, but I think he's an important part of their back end there. And then Micah Johnson at defensive tackle, not the guy he used to be a few years ago, where he was the most dominant defensive tackle in terms of pass rushing ability in the CFL, but he's still a brick wall and one of the big reasons why the run defense was so good last year. So those are just some guys that Saskatchewan has yet to re-sign that are pending free agents on February 8th. And then a final note here is they just restructured the contract of Cody Fajardo. That'll give him a little more money to spend around here in free agency. Now moving on to a team that has been very busy, and that is the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And there's just so many names on this list that I'm just going to kind of breeze through them. Because you guys know who a lot of these guys are. They're back-to-back Grey Cup champions. Linebacker Adam Bighill, bringing him back. Most outstanding defensive player from this past year. Moving on. Left tackle Stanley Bryant, most outstanding offensive lineman 3 of the past 4 years. Enough said there. Quarterback Zach Collaros, back-to-back Grey Cup champion quarterback, just becomes the most highest-paid player in the league at around $550,000 for next season. So, well-deserved from Zach Collaros, MOP of the Grey Cup this year. Well done for Collaros and well-deserved. Special teams ace Mike Miller has continuously led the CFL in special teams tackles year after year. Guard Jeff Gray, who I think is going to be really key to potentially starting on that unit next year after the loss of Drew Delorier to the NFL to the New England Patriots. And then wide receiver Drew Wolotarski signs a 2-year extension. Just a really key Canadian guy. Not going to demand a whole ton of targets, but he will make key catches when the team needs them and potentially have a bigger role some weeks than others. And then finally, center Michael Couture, just before me recording this video, signs an extension, and really key guy, the pivot on that center of that offensive line, and I think he's just a super underrated player, as I said in a video the other week. Now, Winnipeg's roster was so good that they still have a lot of other pending free agents that are notable, but I'll just highlight a few here. Safety Brandon Alexander really was a tone setter for this defense last year. He made that defense scary to throw the ball against in the middle of the field with his hard-hitting style and really getting under the opponent's skin. So really interested to see if he's back and if Winnipeg finds a way to keep him. And then a couple receivers, Rashid Bailey and Darvin Adams. I think it's really key for this team to not lose both of these guys. I think they need to keep at least one of these guys to keep some kind of continuity, especially when you consider Kenny Lawler's getting offered that gigantic contract by the BC Lions, and it's unlikely that Winnipeg will be able to keep him. So important to, keep some of these receivers and keep some of this continuity around Zach Collaros from the past few seasons. And then finally, a trio of guys they haven't re-signed in running backs, Johnny Augustine, Andrew Harris, and Brady Oliveira. And it's just a really big question. What are they going to do? Are they going to embrace the youth movement here in Winnipeg in the backfield and let Harris walk? Or are they just going to re-sign Harris and risk losing both of those guys to other teams that may give them a better opportunity to start? So it's going to be really interesting to see what Winnipeg does with the running back situation. I think that's one of the big questions along with the receiving room that still needs to be answered in the rest of this offseason. And then finally, we move on to the East Division with the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Some key signings they've made here. This was actually a free agent signing because this player was released by his former team, and that's wide receiver Lamar Durant. Instantly becomes Hamilton's best Canadian receiver in many seasons, and dating back to really when Andy Van Toos retired, they really haven't had an impact guy as a Canadian receiver, so that'll be big, I think, if Lamar Durant can get back to his 2019 form. And then another wide receiver, Stephen Dunbar Jr., I kind of alluded to this in the Brandon Banks video last week, that I think the direction of this team is to sign these younger receivers and let Brandon Banks go. So I'm not surprised that they brought back Dunbar after they made that move. And then linebacker Simone Lawrence, I mean, what else has to be said? He's really the heart and soul of this team and then really the face of this franchise right now. And then the final re-signing I wanted to mention was Tunde Adeleke, Canadian safety, really established himself as one of the best Canadian players in the league regardless of position this past season, playing a little bit of halfback, safety, and strong side linebacker. So just really a good all-around player for the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and really important to retain Adeleke here. Now for the guys that the Hamilton Tiger Cats haven't brought back yet, and it's funny, when I look at it, they're clustered in two positional groups, and for one, it's defensive line, and you look at all these defensive linemen that were starting for this team, none of them are under contract for next year yet. Ted Laurent, Jagara Davis, Julian Hauser, and Dylan Wynn are all pending free agents that have yet to sign an extension for 2022 with this team. And that is incredibly concerning because I think when I watch Tiger Cats football, I mean, the last few years is that defensive line is the biggest difference maker for this team. And they really set the tone. The DBs are really good too. And obviously you got Simone at linebacker. But I think those guys up front really set the tone. And when they're playing well, like they were in the playoffs, game against Montreal, they really set the tone up front. Guys like Jagara Davis. I think Jagara Davis is, all things considered, I think probably the best player on this roster from 2021. So I think it's really important for them to find a way to keep him, but we'll talk about him more in a minute here. But I think you need to retain some of these pieces here on the defensive line if you're the Hamilton Tiger Cats, if you want to maintain some of that continuity from the past two seasons advancing to the Grey Cup. And then the other position I wanted to mention is left tackle that, I think they really struggled with this past season, and keeping some continuity at that spot. I think Travis Vorncrawl is under contract for next year, who started one of the playoff games, but I think got injured and couldn't complete the playoffs with Hamilton. But it's going to be really interesting to see how they address that in free agency. If they go out and get an Nicombre Williams from Calgary, and is that where they're going to spend that money that they saved from getting rid of Mazzoli here? So going to be really interesting to see what happens with the Tiger Cats and those two positions, defensive line and left tackle, in this offseason. Now moving down the QEW to Toronto with the Argonauts, and a lot of key re-signings here to get to. Quarterback McLeod Bethel-Thompson signing a 1-year extension. I really think it's a make-or-break year next year for MBT. Had a really great start to the season and really had me convinced. I'm like, this guy can be your guy. But then, honestly, the regression down the second half of the season was incredibly concerning. So I really think it's really important to see what he has over a full 18-game CFL season. I don't think they were really going to find a major upgrade on the open market. I think a lot of these quarterbacks in the CFL are really close, given that they all had really down seasons across the board last year. So I'm going to be really interested to see what happens with McLeod Bethel-Thompson in 2022. They also brought back kicker Boris Beatty, who does punting duties as well. Incredibly valuable. You only have to use one roster spot on that kicking situation if you're Toronto. And, obviously has a hell of a leg, can make kicks from very far out, and scored basically all their points in the East Final this year. So really key re-signing there. I think he was a really important part of their success in these close games last year. Hoinok Mwamba at middle linebacker. Not the player he was a few years ago when he was most outstanding Canadian, but still a very efficient linebacker in the middle of that defense, going to pile up a lot of tackles, but also has a little bit of a plus coverage ability as well from a middle linebacker spot, especially being a Canadian there. And then Tavares Daniels at wide receiver. had his moments last year. I think my biggest knock with Daniels, and I've said this in my top 15 wide receivers video, is just the consistency. I think in terms of talent, he's right up there with any receiver in the league, but he just needs to show it on a consistent basis. So those are just some key re-signings that I wanted to highlight from Toronto. But where it really gets interesting for Toronto is who they've been linked to already in this negotiation window, and it's one really big free agent from a big-time rival, and there's Jared Davis of the Hamilton Tiger Cats, who I just mentioned was, in my opinion, the most impactful Tiger Cat over the past 2 seasons, and from that defensive end position, just causing havoc even when he's not getting sacks, getting a lot of pressures, and when you look at the numbers this year, I think he only had like 7 sacks on the year, but consistently adding pressure every game, and I think it would be a huge power shift from Hamilton to Toronto if Toronto's able to land him on February 8th. Now, finally, I just wanted to mention a question that came to my mind when I was looking at Toronto's pending free agents, because there's not a ton of guys that I'd be like, wow, I must re-sign them, because they've done a lot of their work a few weeks ago with a lot of their offensive line signings and such. And I think a lot of their spots that they have pending free agents, they can really improve on. So I think one question that really came to my mind when I was thinking of Toronto was, do they bring back Cameron Judge now that Dexter McCoyle has retired? And Dexter McCoyle was an absolute stud for this team this past season, and coming back to the CFL, I believe, after being away for a few years, and was one of the more impactful weak side linebackers in the CFL. And that really took away from Cameron Judge, who was supposed to be this big free agent signing, and really didn't pan out for this team. And so I think now that McCoyle's gone, do they bring back Cameron Judge and he give him another chance at being that starter next year? And because he honestly just got beat out by a better player in McCoyle this past season. Now moving on to the Ottawa Redblacks, and this team doesn't have a lot of guys that they've brought back so far that are notable, because similar to Edmonton, they have a lot of players on this team that they're probably willing to let go and really restock this roster with different talent this season. But some notable guys they have brought back: wide receiver Nate Mahar, a Canadian receiver who had kind of a breakout season a little bit this year. I think he had about 500 yards in a shortened season, so that's pretty good. I know the talent in the receiving core was not great, but I think he was kind of a bright spot for this group. Abdul Kanay, defensive back, had a really strong season, I think, on the back end. Obviously had that great performance week 1 against Edmonton with the pick 6 that sealed the game, but I think he was one of their better defensive backs all season long. And then similarly, Randall Evans, another key guy in that secondary. So I think defensively they have some stuff to build on. And I think those defensive backs are going to be really key to that success carrying over in 2022. Now, with Ottawa, we have a lot of information about rumors about who they could possibly be interested in for other teams. They're said to be obviously pursuing very heavily Jeremiah Masoli, quarterback for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. And I expect them to land him. I just think with the Hamilton connection there with Sean Burke and the opportunity to bring in a lot of these other former Tiger Cats teammates, guys like Jalen Acklin and Dylan Wynn, that they've already been rumored as well to be linked to being interested in this offseason. So I really think they're going to go all after these Hamilton guys. And I think it's a pretty smart strategy, because Hamilton had a pretty good roster the last couple of seasons. So expect them to kind of get gutted, and look for Ottawa to be a team that guts them a lot this offseason. And then another guy they've been looking at is Rasheed Bailey, wide receiver for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. I think very underrated receiver that could really have a big spike in production with a bigger role. And then finally, Hunter Stewart, who's been a somewhat bright spot on the BC Lions as a interior offensive lineman the past few years. Been one of the BC Lions' longest tenured players, but I think offensive linemen always in high demand across the CFL. Now, finally, some guys they haven't re-signed yet, but I think they should. Offensive lineman Nolan McMillan has been a very consistent starter for them. I think he was banged up a lot this past season, but that whole offensive line basically was. So I think it's important for them to bring him back, because I think he is definitely going to get a pretty big contract offer on the open market, being a Canadian offensive lineman. But I think that, he's had a high-level play just in recent years, as recently as 2019. So I think it's important for them to try to retain him there. Avery Ellis, been a bright spot as a pass rusher for them the past few seasons. I think it's important to not leave the cupboard completely bare from, carryover from last season. So I think Avery Ellis is a worthwhile piece to keep for Ottawa. And then linebacker, strong side linebacker, Don Yanumba. Just a big fan of his game. And I think even though he didn't play his best this past season, I think he's a safe rebound candidate given that, how consistent he's been in a multitude of roles across his CFL career. Now our final team, the Montreal Alouettes. And not a lot of key re-signings recently just because I think a lot of their work was already done after they got the quarterback situation settled very early after the season. And they re-signed Eugene Lewis, a key wide receiver. But some key re-signings they've made recently: Nick Usher, defensive end, very much in terms of flashing potential the past few seasons. The issue I've only had with him is his discipline. He gets a lot of roughing the passer penalties I've seen the past few seasons, just a lot of, undisciplined kind of stuff. But if he can clean that up, I think he has talent to be one of the best edge rushers in the CFL, and I think Montreal is a good one there. And then kick returner Mario Alford, who I spoke about in a previous video a couple weeks ago as an underrated free agent for this team. I think just a really underrated punt returner, and has proven to be one of the better returners in the CFL the past few seasons when he's been on the field. It's all about staying healthy for him, so I think it's a worthwhile flyer for Montreal to bring him back for 2022. Then wide receiver Dante Absher, who has stuck around the past few seasons through the canceled 2020 season, because I think they really believe in this guy's potential. Hasn't really got that full-time opportunity because they had a bunch of other guys emerge the past few seasons. So I'm interested to see if they let any of these other receivers go. Does Absher finally get that full-time starting opportunity this season? Now, speaking of which, they do have some key guys to re-sign still. Jake Weineke, wide receiver, led the CFL in touchdown receptions this past season, I believe, and just was a dynamic player for them from day one last season, and really formed one of the best receiving duos in the league with Eugene Lewis. So I'm really interested to see what happens if they are able to retain him. He's going to be very well sought after on the open market, I do believe. So going to be interesting to see if Montreal can retain him. But like I said, does Absher get that opportunity if a guy like Weineke, is off the team for next season? And then a guy like Patrick Levels, that strong side linebacker, really dynamic player, can play a lot of defensive back positions as well. And I think I underrated him going into my roster review. I kind of called him a little bit of an average player, but I think I really started to see his impact in the coverage aspect of the game this past season, and I thought he was one of their more impactful defenders throughout the 2021 season. And then David Menard, their nominee for Most Outstanding Canadian last year, and the East nominee for Most Outstanding Canadian. Kind of a fluke, as I was talking about before, I think, in terms of the level of production we saw from Menard, but I think he's a good player, and we'll be interested to see if Montreal breaks the bank or not to bring him back as a Canadian starter, who didn't actually start any games, but I think he'll be very highly paid because he put up such a great sack production last season. And then finally, to close it out, I just was pondering thoughts of how I would improve this team and really try to make a splash if I'm the Montreal Alouettes this offseason. And I said, why not make a run at Canadian defensive end Kwaku Boateng, who is rumored to be leaving Edmonton. I think a lot of teams are going to be after him, but I think you're in that position where you don't really have an impact Canadian defensive lineman if Menard doesn't come back. And I think Kwaku is a better player than Menard. All due respect to Menard, but I think Kwaku's really shown it throughout his career, not even just in terms of putting up the sack production, but just the consistent every down pass rushing ability and ability to play run defense as well. And I think he's the best Canadian defensive end we have in our game, and we'll be interested to see if Montreal's one of their teams, those teams that throws their hat in the ring for him. But that is going to conclude today's video, ladies and gentlemen. Finally, I know it was very long-winded, but I think I wanted to do something very in-depth about every team, and I hope everyone made use of those timestamps in the description if they just wanted to watch a certain part of the video. So, thank you all for watching, and hope everyone joins me for that free agency stream next week. Really excited for that, guys. Noon, Tuesday, February 8th. Mark it on your calendars. And with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Have a great day. Peace.